It's Friday, the 18th of July. Welcome to the President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. All right, let's get briefed. First up, we'll have the latest developments from the war in Ukraine as Russian leaders threaten the U.S. and NATO allies with, quote, preemptive strikes over President Trump's pledge to boost weapons shipments to Ukraine. Well, I don't see how that could go wrong. Later in the show, a new U.S. intelligence assessment finds that last month's strikes on Iran's nuclear sites only fully destroyed one of Iran's three main facilities. The assessment warns that the mullahs could likely restart enrichment activity at the other two sites within just a few months. Plus, China threatens to torpedo a deal that would grant the U.S. control over two key ports near the Panama Canal, unless the Chinese Communist Party is cut in on the deal. We'll discuss the implications for President Trump's vision of American dominance over the critical trade passage. And in today's back of the brief, the Trump administration sanctions the leadership of Venezuela's notoriously violent Tren de Aragua, or TDA gang, in their latest attempts to crack down on the group's drug and human trafficking operations. But first, today's PDB Spotlight. We'll begin with the war in Ukraine, as Russian leaders crank up their threats against the West over the recent arms deal struck between President Trump and the NATO alliance. While the Kremlin was initially quiet after Trump announced the new arrangement on Monday, which will see advanced U.S. weapons start flowing back to Ukraine through European allies, Russian officials are now rattling the saber in a big way. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who currently serves both as deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council and as chief saber rattler and spouter of insane threats, he warned Thursday that Moscow will consider launching, quote, preemptive strikes against the NATO alliance, saying their actions amount to a, quote, full-scale war against Russia. It's according to a report from Fox News. Honestly, Medvedev really needs to level out his medications. Medvedev accused the West of having, quote, treachery in their blood, and said Moscow is ready to take the proverbial gloves off if the U.S. and NATO allies continue to, in his view, escalate the war in Ukraine. That, of course, would be the war that Putin and his Kremlin toadies started. As a brief reminder, President Trump's new arrangement with NATO allows European allies to send both defensive and offensive American weapons to Ukraine from their own stocks, while purchasing replacements from America's military industry. The first tranche of weapons will reportedly cost NATO members $10 billion, though it's unclear what specific weapons will be included outside of defensive Patriot missile systems. While announcing the arms deal, Trump, angered by Vladimir Putin's doublespeak regarding peace talks, also gave the Russian strongman a 50-day deadline to reach a peace deal with Kyiv. Trump has threatened new sanctions and 100% secondary tariffs on countries buying Russian energy products if Putin ignores the ultimatum. Now, I'm going to make two declarations here, neither of them necessarily rocket science. First is Putin is not going to change his stripes within that 50-day deadline. And second, Putin is not the sort of cat that responds well to threats and ultimatums. Medvedev told Russian media, quote, the statements of Western politicians on this topic are complete nonsense. We need to act accordingly, to respond in full, and if necessary, launch preemptive strikes. He continued, quote, what is happening today is a proxy war, but in essence, it's a full-scale war, quote. He cited the use of Western missiles, satellite intelligence provided to Ukraine, threats of sanctions packages, and what he described as, quote, loud statements about the militarization of Europe. Now, he also said, it's another attempt to destroy the historical anomaly hated by the West. That would be Russia, our country, he said. If the stakes weren't so serious and high, watching the Kremlin try to play the role of victim here would be insanely entertaining. Separately, a spokesman for the Russian Foreign Ministry said Trump is attempting to blackmail Moscow into capitulation and, ironically, accused Kyiv of abandoning the peace process. Honestly, you cannot make this stuff up. But the current priority for Trump and NATO is getting Kyiv much-needed Patriot air defense systems so they can better protect themselves from Russia's relentless aerial assaults. Germany and Norway have already committed to sending their own Patriot systems, and NATO's top military commander said Thursday they're working to get the defensive batteries to Ukraine as quickly as possible. The logistics of the transfers will be discussed in detail on Monday during a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which oversees military aid to Kyiv. Trump is also looking outside of the NATO alliance to source the relatively scarce Patriot batteries. On Thursday, U.S. officials notified Switzerland that 5 Patriot batteries purchased from the U.S. in 2022 with a pledged delivery date of 2026 will be diverted now to Ukraine. Well, this is all welcome news for leaders in Kyiv. The timing for deliveries remains unclear. The bureaucratic uncertainty, along with the 50-day window granted to Putin by Trump before sanctions kick in, has Ukraine on edge. Ukrainian President Zelensky said he is, quote, very grateful that Trump has shown a willingness to pursue sanctions, but is encouraging the president to accelerate the pressure campaign against Moscow. In an exclusive interview with the New York Post published on Thursday, Zelensky warned that the 50-day deadline is a futile waste of time that will just end up costing lives. Zelensky noted that Putin has shown he is, quote, not ready for compromises and will continue to make a mockery of Trump's efforts to negotiate a peaceful settlement until Russia is backed into a corner financially. As we've previously noted, secondary tariffs, as long as they're effectively enforced, could deal a significant blow to Russia's oil trade, which, frankly, has been kept afloat by countries like China and India. Zelensky told the Post that Putin, quote, needs to feel this. He added, quote, Putin has wasted President Trump's time. I would very much like to see the U.S. put some pressure on this situation with sanctions, and so the sooner, the faster it can be done, the better, end quote. Trump has suggested he may be willing to turn the tables on Putin before the 50-day deadline expires. On Tuesday, Trump said, quote, a lot of opinions change very rapidly. Might not be 50 days. Might be much sooner than 50 days, end quote. All right, coming up next, a new U.S. intelligence assessment finds that last month's strikes on Iran's nuclear sites only fully destroyed one of Iran's 3 main facilities. And China threatens to torpedo a deal that would grant American control over 2 key ports near the Panama Canal. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here. I want to take just a few moments of your time to talk about your online security. That's critically important. Look, right now, the headlines are chock full of data breaches and regulatory rollbacks, and all that makes us, well, more vulnerable. But here's the thing. There is something you can do about it. And I want to tell you about a great company. It's called Delete Me. Now, Delete Me is here to make it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online. Delete Me constantly monitors and removes your personal info from data broker sites, sending regular reports so you know exactly what's been found and what's been deleted. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our PDB listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/brief and use the promo code BRIEF at checkout. Again, the only way to get that 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/brief and enter code BRIEF at checkout. One more time, that's joindeleteme.com/brief, code BRIEF. Welcome back to the PDB. We're now getting a clearer picture of what President Trump's targeted strike last month on Iran's 3 nuclear enrichment sites achieved and, well, what it didn't achieve. A new U.S. intelligence assessment finds that while the one-night campaign, dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer, severely damaged Iran's Fordo nuclear facility, the other key enrichment sites at Natanz and Isfahan were only partially degraded. Both may still be capable of resuming uranium enrichment far sooner than the Trump administration initially claimed, possibly within the next several months. This latest finding, first reported by NBC News, runs counter to the White House's post-strike messaging, which hailed the operation as a total success. Now, Deputy Press Secretary Anna Kelly told reporters that the mission had, quote, obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities. And Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell went even further, declaring the sites were, quote, in the dirt and would take years to recover. But 5 current and former U.S. officials familiar with the intelligence say those depictions may be overly optimistic. According to briefings shared with lawmakers, Fordo was indeed gutted by 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs in their first confirmed use in combat. Officials now estimate the site could be offline for up to 2 years. The problem? Well, the problem is that Natanz and Isfahan weren't built the same way as Fordo, and parts of their deep underground infrastructure may have survived the blasts. That survival wasn't entirely unexpected. Intelligence agencies reportedly warned prior to the strikes that some fortified sections were likely beyond the reach of even the Pentagon's heaviest ordnance. CIA Director John Ratcliffe, in a closed-door June briefing, told lawmakers that while the metal conversion facility at Natanz, required for enrichment, had been, quote, destroyed to a degree that would require years to build, enriched uranium in Isfahan was likely only buried, not vaporized. Two officials said there's been no sign yet that Iran is attempting to excavate that material. Still, Israel is watching closely. A senior official told reporters that any attempt by Tehran to recover entombed uranium would cross a red line and trigger a military response. The official said, quote, even if some remains under Isfahan, it's effectively unreachable unless Iran wants a war. Meanwhile, officials in Washington are focusing their messaging almost exclusively now on Fordo. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane have both emphasized the site's destruction in recent statements, downplaying the mixed results elsewhere. We're also learning from the assessment that Operation Midnight Hammer was a scaled-down version of a broader military option handcrafted by U.S. Central Command and originally drawn up during the Biden administration. That more expansive option would have involved a weeks-long bombardment of 6 nuclear and missile-related sites across the Islamic Republic. President Trump reportedly rejected that full campaign after being briefed, citing concerns over mass casualties and a desire to avoid a prolonged military engagement, in line with his campaign messaging. One former official familiar with the planning told NBC News, quote, we were willing to go all the way in our options, but the president did not want to, end quote. At the time of the strikes, U.S. and UN inspectors assessed the mullahs had enough fissile material for as many as 10 nuclear weapons. Much of that is now believed to be buried beneath collapsed infrastructure. Yet, with parts of Iran's enrichment apparatus, especially in Natanz and Isfahan, still intact, U.S. and Israeli officials cautioned that the threat is only diminished, not eliminated. Still, Washington stands firm in calling the attack a strategic win, and Trump isn't ruling out further military action. When asked if he'd greenlight another bombing campaign should Iran resume enrichment, he answered simply, quote, sure, without question, absolutely. So, with Iran's nuclear program under surveillance, any move to rebuild could reignite conflict. The latest intelligence, of course, is still evolving and will provide updates as insight is obtained. Okay, turning to China, the Communist government is threatening to block a $23 billion sale of more than 40 strategic ports, including 2 near the Panama Canal, unless its state-run shipping giant, COSCO, is granted a stake in the deal. As we've previously discussed here on the PDB, the issue of control of the canal has been a geopolitical flashpoint under the Trump administration. At the center of this dispute is a proposed acquisition by BlackRock and the Mediterranean Shipping Company, or MSC, of port infrastructure owned by Hong Kong-based conglomerate CK Hutchison. Now, the portfolio includes assets stretching across vital maritime choke points, with the Panama Canal sites drawing particular scrutiny as tensions between Washington and Beijing continue to simmer. President Trump has already weighed in, calling any Chinese stake in the region unacceptable. He labeled the proposed transaction a, quote, national security win, but only if the ports are fully transferred to Western control. Trump, who's been consistently objecting to Beijing's growing foothold near the canal, is expected to ratchet up pressure should COSCO be allowed to enter the agreement. And according to sources familiar with the negotiations, Beijing is doing the same. The Wall Street Journal reports Chinese officials have privately warned BlackRock, MSC, and Hutchison that unless COSCO is brought in as an equal partner, Beijing will move to block the transaction outright. The original plan, hatched without Chinese input, reportedly infuriated Beijing. In response, Chinese regulators have suspended further dealings with Hutchison and affiliated firms controlled by Hong Kong billionaire Li Ka-shing. That's created a standoff. Under the current terms, COSCO is barred from joining until the exclusivity window between Hutchison, BlackRock, and MSC expires on the 27th of July. But behind the scenes, all business parties are reportedly preparing to welcome COSCO once that window opens. The pressure campaign from Beijing extends beyond the deal itself. During trade negotiations with the U.S. and Switzerland back in May, Chinese envoys raised the Chinese company COSCO's participation directly, phrasing it not as a commercial question, but as a matter of national interest. Now, that message apparently wasn't lost on American officials. It also wasn't unprecedented. Chinese regulators have used similar pressure before, citing antitrust concerns to sink deals that threatened Beijing's leverage. Back in 2014, the Chinese Communist government torpedoed the shipping alliance between MSC, Denmark's Maersk, and France's CMA CGM for precisely the reason of exclusion. Now, I'd like to point out that China's leverage over the current port deal is substantial. BlackRock and Hutchison operate extensive ventures in mainland China, and MSC, one of the largest shippers of Chinese exports, has little incentive to provoke Beijing. Whether the Trump administration moves to block COSCO's entry outright remains to be seen. But one thing is clear. Any Chinese stake in the Panama Canal is almost certain to inflame U.S.-China tensions and reignite debate over who controls the key avenues of global trade. All right, coming up next in the back of the brief. The Trump administration sanctions the leadership of Venezuela's notoriously violent Tren de Aragua, or TDA, gang. Stay with us. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now, here's an important fact that you might have missed. July, and we are in July, is National Grilling Month. It's true. And Tri-Tails Beef is helping you celebrate it the American way, over a fire with real beef raised by real ranchers. Couldn't be any simpler. Tri-Tails is a fifth-generation family-run ranch in Texas, delivering pasture-raised, grain-finished beef with zero shortcuts. It's very simple. Great beef delivered straight from their ranch to your front doorstep. And right now, you can get $10 off their 20-pound ground beef bundle, plus 2 free flat iron steaks. Just head to trybeef.com/PDB. Stock up before the 22nd of July and fill your freezer in celebration of National Grilling Month. Go to trybeef.com/PDB today. In today's back of the brief, the Treasury Department formally sanctioned one of the Western Hemisphere's most wanted fugitives, Hector Guerrero Flores, a.k.a. or known as Warrior Boy, the elusive ringleader of Tren de Aragua, also known as TDA. Yes, the fellow chose Warrior Boy as his nickname. The sanctions, issued Thursday by the Office of Foreign Assets Control, freezes all of Warrior Boy's assets in the U.S. and bars American citizens and businesses from engaging in any transactions with him or his inner circle. Well, I'm sure that will convince other criminals not to do business with Warrior Boy. They'll be like, well, I'd sure like to work with Warrior Boy on that narco-trafficking project, but the Office of Foreign Assets Control, well, they've told me not to. The move marked the latest move against TDA. It's a sprawling Venezuelan crime syndicate that Guerrero, or as we know him, Warrior Boy, founded and led from inside the now notorious Tocorón prison. In February, President Trump designated the gang as a foreign terrorist organization and a specially designated global terrorist entity. His criminal empire stretches far beyond Venezuela. From behind bars, he commanded more than 1,000 gang members, building a network that now spans much of South America and has established a disturbing foothold inside the U.S. Twice, he managed to escape Venezuelan custody, once in 2012 and again in 2023, and probably not at all due to rampant corruption within the Venezuelan law enforcement system. He remains on the run. As we've covered extensively here on the PDB, TDA's operations include drug and human trafficking, extortion, illegal gold mining, and contract killings. The State Department says Guerrero also oversaw clandestine border crossings into Colombia and controlled smuggling routes along Venezuela's Caribbean coast. But it's the gang's infiltration into the U.S. that has officials most alarmed. TDA is now reportedly active in at least 16 U.S. states. Its members have trafficked a synthetic stimulant known as pink cocaine, seized control of apartment complexes, and, according to law enforcement, carried out a wide range of criminal activities. Thursday's sanctions target Guerrero, his wife, Mrs. Warrior Boy, and 4 of his top lieutenants, blocking all of them from the U.S. financial system. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said, quote, "The Trump administration will not allow TDA to continue to terrorize our communities and harm innocent Americans." The crackdown also draws a sharp contrast with the approach taken under former President Biden. During his term, Biden expanded a humanitarian parole program that allowed up to 350,000 Venezuelans to enter the U.S. Federal reports now indicate that some of those migrants were affiliated with TDA. Upon returning to office, Trump moved swiftly to terminate that program and to revoke temporary legal status for Venezuelan migrants, citing the national security threat posed by groups like TDA. And by the way, a $5 million bounty remains in place for information leading to Warrior Boy's capture. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Friday, the 18th of July. Now, if you have any questions or comments, and I hope you do, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And I don't want to point out the obvious, but I think I'm about to. Today is Friday, which can only mean one thing. This evening at 10 p.m. on the First TV, a brand spanking new episode of America's favorite weekend news show hits the airwaves in full-colored VistaVision and stereophonic sound. That's right, a new episode of the acclaimed PDB Situation Report. You can also catch it on our YouTube channel at President's Daily Brief and podcast platforms everywhere. I'm Mike Baker. I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.